Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining CivilNet. Today we'll be speaking with Rayhan Demytrie. She's the BBC correspondent for South Caucasus, and she was in Nargono Karabakh recently. We've all seen her reports, I think, more or less. And but today we get a chance to speak to her one-on-one and ask her whatever's been left behind the cameras. Thank you, Rayhan, for joining us so much today.
Thank you, Rubina. Hello.
So we've seen your reports, and we'd like to also ask you of like a general evaluation of the situation.
I think it's the worst predictions coming alive, because we all know that the unresolved conflict over Nagorno Karabakh is there, and it's something that always kind of dominates the news agenda in the South Caucasus region. I mean, it doesn't really dominate on the international level, but for journalists who are based in this region, they're aware of it, because we've been hearing. I've been doing this job for over 2 years now, and throughout my role as a BBC journalist covering the South Caucasus region, we've been regularly hearing reports about skirmishes or kind of small pockets of fighting along the contact line between Azerbaijan and Nagorno Karabakh. So last year I went to Nagorno Karabakh. Prior to that, I went to Azerbaijan because I wanted to cover this story from both sides. And I met some of the people who were displaced by the conflict. I also visited regions in Azerbaijan which are close to the contact line. And after that, I went to Nagorno Karabakh to report on the other side of the problem. And only after being to the region, I realized how important, how vital is to understand this conflict, because it absolutely determines the history of both Azerbaijan and Armenia after 1990s. And I think that both nations are So it's impossible to report on in these countries without really understanding the nature of this conflict.
And so last time you visited was a relatively time of peace, relatively, and now you visited where it was like a heated conflict. Your observations about the situation. I know earlier when we were speaking, you said there was an issue for the standards of journalist security. We'd like to hear more.
Sure. Yes. When the story broke out on Saturday, was April the 2nd. I was in Tbilisi, where I'm based, and I covered the region from here. But very soon after we started covering the story from here, we realized that it was something out of ordinary, given the scale of the fighting, the reports about the weapons that were used, and casualties on the ground. So immediately, of course, the decision was made to travel to Karabakh via Yerevan. And I arrived there on Monday the 4th of April. And it was really kind of I think the situation, it seemed that everything was getting out of control, because there were reports on Monday that Azerbaijan threatened to attack Stepanakert. And that really, I think, shocked a lot of people. So I think I've kind of what I noticed is that the rhetoric, we hear a lot from both sides of the conflict, the language that is used, the accusations that are used. But this statement that Stepanakert might be attacked, I mean, it kind of went beyond what we hear normally. Yes. Exactly. So it really seemed that the situation might get out of control. And on my arrival in Stepanakert, I met with some local journalists, Armenian journalists, and they've been working round the clock, visiting the areas close to the contact line, and kind of, in a very hyper state, sharing their stories of what's been happening. Some of the journalists were close to the areas that were shelled, so they even filmed that happening. And I remember in particular speaking to one journalist. She was extremely helpful, and she said that day on Monday morning, they all piled into one bus, and they were taken to the thick of it, where it was happening, and I thought that I was worried for them, just as in solidarity as a journalist. I guess at the BBC we all get trained. It's called the hostile environment training, and without this training you can't go to active conflict areas. You need to be trained to know how to act, because no story is worth you risking your life. And at least you can be prepared with the knowledge and act with the knowledge. So I mean, that is one of the reasons why we, for example, we couldn't shoot off and drive to the fighting area immediately on the arrival to Stepanakert. You have to kind of make a judgment calls and so on. So I was worried for local journalists, because they were just going in different directions and so on. And that's what I thought. I thought it would be great to, I don't know, propose to media organizations or to propose to NGOs that deal with journalists that it would be great to train some of the journalists who specialize in covering this conflict, train them to act in a conflict situation. Yeah.
If you would have to give some fast advice to journalists, what would your main points be as far as safety goes?
Oh, it's a 5-day course that we go through, and it's done by ex-military. So I don't know if I can do kind of fast forward advice. Yeah, but I think one thing to bear in mind is that you need to plan as much as possible. You need to know where you're going. You need to speak to local people on the ground before you get there, just to evaluate the situation. You need to get as much information as possible from the authorities about the latest situation.
And another question: Did the authorities collaborate? Was it easy to get this information?
Well, of course, it was a very hectic time, and a lot of representatives of Nagorno Karabakh government, they were under a lot of pressure and stress, especially representatives of from the defense ministry, and they were the people with whom we wanted to keep in touch on a kind of hourly basis, to get the latest information, because we would get wires, meaning kind of agency reports, and our role as journalists based on the ground was to verify that information, to confirm it. In kind of some situations it was difficult to get through on the phone, but there was enough help. There were people who came from Yerevan, and they are much more experienced working with international media. So they were really helpful in facilitating, access. So in that sense, I think we were, with their help, we were able to get through. But I think on a local level, of course, I don't think there's understanding how news works, and that, if something is happening, we need confirmation now. We don't need it in 5 hours' time, because the situation might change.
As much as I watch international reports on Nagorno Karabakh, the wording is kind of very different. It's called the separatist region, it's called the Nagorno Karabakh region, it's hardly called, that's not an issue for us, because we have the freedom to call Nagorno Karabakh a republic. We have the freedom to call Nagorno Karabakh Artsakh as well. So how does that subtly work with you?
I would say that it's one of the most complicated areas. Reporting on this conflict is incredibly difficult task, because you might be offending one or another side of the conflict. And throughout my reporting, I remember even a year ago, before escalation of violence that we saw last week, as soon as my report was published, I'd get lots of emails with complaints from people saying, how dare you, or why are you doing it? There will always be, no matter how you're doing your job, there will always be someone who's not happy with the wording, with the coverage. But of course, what we follow the kind of internationally recognized territories, and Nagorno Karabakh is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan. It hasn't changed. It's and in my reporting, I was calling it an unrecognized Republic of Nagorno Karabakh. But you will see even the names of each settlement. Stepanakert is called Han Kendi in Azeri, and that applies to any other settlement. We were saying it is Stepanakert, but wherever, if I could somehow reflect that, I was saying that because this is unresolved conflict and the status is not really kind of recognized by the international community, every city, every settlement has a name in both Armenian and in Azeri.
And when you're there and you're being partial and you're reporting about a conflict, but then you witness all this human situation, how does that work? How does that integrate, or does it get integrated into reports?
I think in reporting any conflict situation, the human side of the story is something that the international audience can connect with. I guess because I've been there a year ago, I revisited the village where we went a year ago, and I saw that school which we visited a year ago, and where we were filming Halo Trust doing training for kids, not to kind of pick up, unexploded devices and so on. So seeing that school being shelled was not very pleasant, of course. And the next thing was to visit the house of the family that we interviewed a year ago. And you've seen the report that we did. I mean, it's just revisiting the house and seeing how people were living in a rush, and recalling what the mother of four who lived there was telling me a year ago, that about her fears. That this might happen at any given moment, and what is she going to do with her 4 kids? So it was quite kind of emotional to revisit her house and to see that they had to leave. There were like backpacks of her kids still kind of against the wall there. The phrase that she said was this war might start at any given moment, and if they come, they will not look at us, that I'm a woman, this is my children. They'll just think that we're Armenians, and that's it, basically. But going back to the kind of human side of the story, I think one morning we were quite lucky to stay in Stepanakert, and we went to film a funeral of one of the soldiers, which of course again was very kind of emotional event. And then we went to meet some of the refugees. Sorry, they're not refugees, they are people displaced by the conflict. So from those villages that were affected, and of course it's just horrible to see that they're there. They didn't have time to pick up any of their stuff, and they didn't know when they can go back. Some of the people that we've spoken to, they haven't heard from some of their relatives because they all had to run away so quickly. And this is something that I wanted to follow up on and find out. I'm really interested, and I want to know what happens to these people. When are they going to be able to go back to their homes, and who will help them to rebuild their houses, because a lot of houses were damaged in this fighting.
When you return, I hope it will be during a more peaceful time, and I hope the next story you tell from Nagorno Karabakh will be that of better endings.
Peace.
Yes, peace.